Welcome back, Leominsterites. I'm your state representative, Natalie Higgins, here for our summer episode of Representing Leominster. We are filming it on July 31st. This has been an ever-changing episode because of Rep. Kilcoyne and my schedules with the end of session, but I'm so excited to have Rep. Kilcoyne in the studios because I think the last time you joined, we were virtual and we were on Zoom because it was the middle of COVID.
Yes.
So welcome to Leominster Access TV studios.
Well, thank you for having me. It's so excited to be here in person in studio.
Yeah, and so really excited to catch up. We're at the end of session. Right after this, you and I are going to head into the State House to vote on the final fiscal year 24 budget, which I am so thrilled that we're sending it to Governor Healey's desk. And so tell me how your session's going and tell the Leominster viewers a little bit about your district.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with my district. My district is probably really pretty familiar to a lot of the Leominsterites that are watching that you represent. I represent six communities just south of here. So it's called the 12th Worcester District. It includes the towns of Berlin, Boylston, Clinton, Sterling, Lancaster, and then I have a precinct in Northborough. So a lot of overlap, I think, on regional issues that the city of Leominster shares. And in fact, what's kind of unique about my district is many of the towns, you know, in terms of a major city close by, we're sandwiched right between Worcester to our south and then Leominster and Fitchburg to our north. So it's one of those areas where I think it's been really exciting that I get to work with you and Representative Kuzmarek right over east of us. Trying to think of the compass in my head.
Northwest.
Representative Zlotnick out in Gardner, and then our friends down in Worcester as well. You know, I think we've tried really hard, I think, to make sure that, you know, back over in Beacon Hill, Central Mass, especially North Central Mass, is well represented. So far, you know, we're still kind of smack almost to the halfway point of our 2-year session. So we're actually maybe 6 months out. January will kind of mark that halfway point, unless you count the end of full formal sessions in the summer. But so far, I think this session has been off to an exciting start. As you know, I got elected in 2020. And as we referenced earlier,
you have not had a conventional start to your time. But luckily for you and for our delegation, you worked for your predecessor.
Right.
So you come with kind of a wealth of experience and far more time in the State House than many of us have.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And when I first got elected in 2020, that was so crucial because, you know, we were coming into this work wanting to do the best that we could for our constituents and our communities, but also having to navigate it remotely, you know, essentially from our homes, as so many others did during that pandemic. And fortunately, the House and Senate had figured out a way to remotely do a lot of the necessary work that had to be done. But having that experience that I had made it a lot easier to navigate. So when it came time to file bills that first cycle, you know, we didn't have anybody kind of guiding us on how to do that. So having done that as a staffer made it a lot easier. And, you know, I think we tried really hard, myself and other members that got elected that year in the middle of the pandemic, to help each other out. And also, you know, we were all, I think I can speak collectively for my class, as they call us, as when we come in, our legislative class, that people like yourselves and other veterans really stepped up to make sure that we had somebody to call if we did have questions. I think one of the first times we got to collectively sit down, I think you, Representative Zlotnick, Representative Ferguson, who at that time I shared a town with, kind of took us under your wing and said, here's how the legislature works. Because we have somewhat of a young delegation. I came in with Rep. Kuzmarek in Fitchburg. Rep. Scarsdale just got elected a little while ago over in Lunenburg. So a lot of exciting youthful energy happening up over here.
And it's how I was welcomed, right, by the folks who came before me. And I think a strength that we have in the North Central delegation, I talk about it often on this show, is, you know, there's only a handful of us that represent this region just because of population density.
Right.
And we're never going to compete with the Boston delegation or even some of the larger cities. We really have to pool our voices together and talk about what's in common. And I think one of the strengths we have is we have the only tripartisan delegation between the Democrats, the Republicans, and an independent legislator, Susanna Whips. And I think that makes us really strong when we do speak together. And never more have we seen this around the fight to save the birthing center at Leominster Hospital. And as the rep from Leominster, I'm just so grateful for all of you lifting up your voices to talk about how this isn't just Leominster's fight. This is North Central Mass and really, honestly, a statewide fight.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is, you articulated it so well, how important it is for all of us to kind of recognize when, even if something isn't in the border lines of where our districts are drawn, what happens in Leominster affects what the communities in Sterling and Clinton and Lancaster and other communities in the district, or Fitchburg. I think all of us have been grateful for your leadership as the Leominster representative and sort of leading the charge. And I think for us to be able to kind of support those efforts and also give voice to, others that maybe, like the Department of Public Health and the administration who have an impact on these decisions, to hospital executives, to show, the decisions you make in one area is going to have a ripple effect. And I know for me, I represent communities in Sterling that are quite rural, that Leominster is really the easiest access hospital to get to. Clinton, it's almost equal distance between Worcester and Leominster. However, I think there is a lot of people that maybe don't travel that much into Worcester that find it very intimidating. Worcester's the second biggest city in New England. It's not the easiest city to navigate unless you know it well. Leominster, for a lot of people, just provides a much more, I think, calmer, it's less daunting, so to speak, to go to.
And I think as the reps for the Health Alliance Clinton Hospital network, Leominster Hospital, Burbank Hospital, Clinton Hospital, this is also kind of a larger fight about saving our community hospitals and making sure that they're meeting the needs of our community.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the people I represent, especially those in Clinton, where we have Clinton Hospital that is part of the UMass Health Alliance system, which always is confusing for folks because Clinton Hospital also is the name of the Leominster Hospital, but we still call our hospital Clinton Hospital, and I know you call
Leominster Hospital and the Burbank campus, and
but they recognize the importance. I mean, Clinton Hospital's been around for generations. They had a maternity unit that was closed, I think, in the mid 1960s, and so the Leominster campus was the only maternity ward within that hospital system that many people could go to. Of course, Worcester has one as well, and I think for over the years, Clinton has relied so heavily on that hospital. It's so beloved by the community. So many people, you can talk to people that were born. My mother was born in Clinton, right? They remember the doctor. They knew the doctor who delivered them. Even after that unit closed, there were so many that received care for Clinton. So many that still do. That were able to just go 5 minutes down the road and get the care they need, even if they had to then go to a different area for maybe more specialized care. We want to save these parts of our healthcare system. I think, it's easy to get caught up in maybe the more national conversations around healthcare, or even the more statewide conversations around healthcare. And I think it's one thing I've been grateful to be able to work with you on, and the others is making sure that we're talking about our community hospitals in those conversations as well, because we want to make sure that when we look towards the future of healthcare in Massachusetts, these remain vital parts of it.
Yeah. And so to catch folks up for where we are in the process, we're filming this a week after the Department of Public Health hearing. They hold an essential services hearing because maternity care services, birthing centers are essential generally to the community. We anticipate sometime in the next 8 days, the Department of Public Health will rule that this is an essential service. The frustrating thing for us as legislators is that UMass can decide to continue to go forward with the closure, even if they decide that these services are essential to the community. And for so many Leominster residents and North Central Mass residents, I think there's a lot of confusion and anger about how could we let that happen as a state? And we're working together to change the legislation. That's going to take some time, and that's not necessarily going to happen within the next 60 days with the intended closure on September 22nd, 23rd.
Yeah. I think, too, you talked earlier about having worked in the building before. In addition to the technical things that I think it helped prepare you for this work, there are times where the legislative fights, you have to be ready for a marathon and not a sprint. And I think the way that I know that, in order to sustain ourselves and try to help make sure our community understands what we're here to do is having that understanding that, these are fights that we're willing to take on the immediate fight right now, right? And I think that's what we're doing. But when we talk about long-term solutions, those are the fights that are sometimes years, decades, and even generations. And it's not easy, but you have to try to make sure you're ready to have to be in this work for that long. And I think when we talk about healthcare, right, like we or especially the Leominster Hospital situation, one thing that also is great about working with you on these issues is that you and I are women legislators, of which there's not many. And I think, both you and I have tried to speak to this in addition to the local impact, but just the larger context of women's health. And this is not the only community in the state where the maternity ward is closed.
Right.
And you and I have both been able to work a little bit about on healthcare, but larger women's issues with the Women's Caucus and with some of our other women legislators too.
I have never been more hopeful. Like every single day of this fight, I kind of get a little more hope, and some of that comes with some tough realities. So the Department of Public Health a few weeks ago announced kind of an update of data around severe maternal morbidity, and that's kind of like severe health consequences for pregnant people. And something that we had been looking for because the data was kind of old and we wanted new data and we weren't able to cite anything. That the sad reality is in the last decade, severe maternal morbidity has doubled. More than 80% of maternal deaths in Massachusetts are preventable. It's because pregnant people didn't have access to health care. And if we can't figure that out in Massachusetts, that's a hard thing for me to wrap my head around as a community leader. Like if we can't solve this here, we're in trouble. And I think why there's so many stakes on this birthing center at Leominster Hospital is, what does that access look like? I'm worried about Leominster, but what about folks north of us? Right? It's going to be hard for Leominster residents to travel to Worcester, but we're the southernmost. Right.
I know. And I don't think, and I think we can speak candidly in that I don't think we've been really given a response as to what that reality will look like if this happens. And that's a very scary prospect, I think, for the immediate future, certainly the near future. That said, though, to kind of talk about what you were saying earlier about hope, I mean, you kind of have to just keep looking forward into as to what you can do, because I think that I don't want to characterize this as a positive thing. It's not. But I think raising awareness of what's happening in Leominster, of tying it to what other communities are going through, is signaling to others in the state that may not be paying attention, that may think just because we're living in Massachusetts, which has historically had greater healthcare outcomes and health outcomes than other parts in the country, that we're fine. But I remember we all went together before the Committee on Healthcare Financing to testify on
the essential services process.
Exactly. And other legislators from across the state were shocked at what we were telling them was going on, and relayed to us, that they had seen something similar happening in their community. So I do think that there's certain connections being made in that, we are aware, like people are becoming more aware that that community hospitals and the larger context of women's health and healthcare access is more than just about, insurance, and which is obviously a huge part of it, but it also has to do with location and being able to physically access the healthcare that you need.
We're a small state, but we don't have a robust public transit system. And I think that this is helping our colleagues kind of in the eastern part, the greater Boston area that have access to the T, really understand the battles that we've been telling for me for 7 years about what public transit looks like in North Central Mass, and the reality that there is no clear linkage, even in public transit, between Leominster and Worcester.
Right.
And Leominster is the second largest city in Worcester County, and they don't connect easily. Never mind that is not a reasonable option for most pregnant people in distress, in labor, when minutes count. And we hear story after story of pregnant people showing up to Leominster's ER, and sometimes they can't even get them up to the third floor to labor and delivery before that baby is like here. And so luckily they can bring the staff down. But what happens when the staff aren't there to be able to react? Our emergency room staff are trained and are great at saving lives. They're not necessarily trained in pediatrics and in labor and delivery, and spotting those little changes that our labor and delivery team can save lives every single day.
For my district, we are serviced by MWRTA and the WRTA, depending on where you are. Sometimes they overlap each other because there's, we are right on the line and it doesn't always work. But even in that instance, many people can only get access to, one of the vans or get picked up if they have a medical appointment.
Right.
And if they don't, there are many people, you know, in rural areas that are not going to be able to get care that they need unless they have a medical. So what happens, right, if you have an emergency? What happens if you're feeling slightly off? What happens if you're pregnant? And everybody who's experienced pregnancy or knows someone who has, you know, there's so many little things that are part of it.
If folks haven't watched, the Leominster Access TV team did a great job at like covering so much of what's happening with the hospital, kind of in real time, bringing in nurses, being at the DPH hearing. If you didn't catch the whole DPH hearing, it's 4 hours of testimony, but the public testimony, which was the kind of last 3 hours, was the most incredible. And there was one dad who testified, one of the last testimonies, and they had a toddler. His wife was pregnant. She didn't feel right. And but it was right down the street. And he said, like, just go. Just like, you'll have the peace of mind. They'll check you out. They'll send you home. You'll be back in 20 minutes. Like, it's not a big deal. 15 minutes later, he got a call, like, we're having a baby now.
Oh, my gosh.
Like, there was a severe complication that had she waited until the morning, there would not have been a happy ending.
Yeah.
But she had the convenience of being able to go, like, it's right down the street. It's right there. And had she had to go to Worcester, she might not have made that trip and just said, like, it's in my head, like, I'll just wait until the morning, I'll call my doctor in the morning. And so I just worry about what this means for our community. And you have spoken very well. We are ladies of a certain age, right? Like Peter and I are celebrating our 2nd anniversary next week.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, we're having that conversation of, do we have kids? What does that look like? What's that timeline look for us? And you've talked about our moms who gave birth in North Central Mass had more choices than you and I are going to have.
I know.
Already, never mind the closure of Leominster Hospital's birthing center.
It's surreal to think about, right? I mean, we talk so much about, you know, the progress that women have made, and that certainly we have, right? I certainly have more. I've had more career opportunities, more opportunities than my mother or my grandmother did. But there's this little underlying current of when we talk about healthcare, we're not paying attention to making sure that we're not going backward, because it certainly feels like now we are.
Yeah.
And in the larger context of women's healthcare having been a national conversation for years now, especially in the last year since Roe v. Wade fell, it's a little bit surreal at times to think that in our own backyard, we're dismantling access of birthing centers of which we would rely on to start families when we're at that age that we're considering starting a family.
10 years ago, when I was in law school, some folks know this, I traveled to India to work with the Human Rights Law Network in their reproductive justice unit. It wasn't a place that I had done a lot of work, but it was a really amazing opportunity. One of the projects we worked on was a survey of hospital care access for pregnant women and how that impacted communities and how we really needed to make sure that there were hospital access and transportation access, and that folks had that kind of, the home births were much more common in India, kind of as a necessity. But when something went wrong, the ability to get someone to a hospital for that necessary care. I never thought that I would be bringing out stories of that work in Delhi, like, to my work in a city with 45,000 people, in a region with 250,000 people, in a hospital that still serves 600 families a year.
I know. It's kind of mind-boggling. I think, and you probably get this too, you know, a lot of people, when you get elected, especially in the legislature, you know, we're one of, I believe the legislature has is 200 people, including the Senate. About 30% of those elected are women. And so we get asked all the time, like, oh, what's it like, you know, to be a woman legislator? And you know, depending on the situation, you usually try to make sure it's positive, right? You know, you want to I always like to try to do what I can to make it seem, you know, encourage those that might be thinking of going into politics or government, that it's exciting. But there is an important part of that too, where, you know, the people that get elected are the ones that make policy. And I think, you know, to kind of echo what you were saying before, you and I are actually in those, you know, we do have a duty and a responsibility to our constituents and our community to have these conversations, because, you know, we are the ones that will have to make a choice of whether or not to have children and where to give birth and where to raise a family. And my hope is that that perspective is listened to, and that for those right now that are, scared about this decision, that are upset and angry about this decision, that feel worried about, some women are pregnant now that are now worrying where they're going to give birth, that they can hopefully take comfort in the fact that we're hearing them and fighting for them.
And doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that the community knows what's happening, what's at stake, and the hospital understands what this means to us. And I think that has been a really frustrating part for us as a delegation, because we want answers, right? The community wants answers for why is this happening? And because the reason keeps changing over time, that's been really hard for us to be able to kind of bring information back to our constituents. There isn't an easy answer of why this is happening.
Right. And I think we also recognize, too, that there are real challenges in healthcare. We are not ignorant of that. And we are sympathetic to that. But if we are not getting a clear reason as to what's happening, it makes it harder and harder to understand and to empathize with why the hospital is making this decision, while we also know and have, and heard from the community that it will have very real consequences.
And we've explained to the hospital that the scariest reason for the closure of the unit, for it to be staffing, like we're having trouble staffing. Everyone is having trouble staffing across so many sectors. When Ginny's helping hand food pantries out of food, they don't close their doors. They go and find more food. If they're down staffed, they don't shut the doors. They figured out how to do this. Our libraries during the pandemic figured out how to keep people in community together by setting up like roadside, like they got creative. We figured it out. And so for something as needed for our community and as life and death, as when something goes wrong in a labor, like you need trained professionals with tools and experience to be there. And we expect that. I think the other thing we're all grappling with is we expect that in our community hospital. What is a hospital without kind of an ER and a birthing center, right? And we've already seen 10 close in the last 10 years. But at some point, as we're holding ourselves out to be reproductive health care champions to the country and to the world, we kind of have to look introspectively and say, do we actually have access?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, you could talk to anybody maybe across the country, and you mentioned Mass General or Brigham and Women's, some of these nationally or internationally renowned hospital facilities, and they'll know what you're talking about. And however, it doesn't matter if we have the best hospital in the entire world if it means that we can't even get care in our own backyards out in central Massachusetts. Because if we can't rely on these big, incredible facilities that are doing amazing work, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to knock on those hospitals, but
for sure.
they can't care for everybody. And the story that you relayed of the father that testified at the hearing, I believe, that's a perfect example of why, we could have the best gynecologist, obstetrician, thank you, in the entire world. And that person, that care will not help the mom who's feeling a little off, who thinks something could be wrong, but isn't sure. Most women don't want to cause a scene or a fuss, and will try to suppress pain. Most women actually suppress pain or don't honestly or truthfully tell how much pain they're actually in or discomfort. And without that, 15-minute walk or drive, you're gonna have more people ignore warning signs and not get the care that they absolutely need, and in the worst case scenarios, jeopardize their lives or their unborn child's life.
So we should pivot to something hopeful. I mean, we're doing everything that we can, and we'll keep you posted on all the ways that you can work to continue to save the birthing center. There's this wonderful Facebook page called Leave Labor in Leominster that is kind of doing updates daily or multiple times a day. If you are on Facebook, check it out. And we will keep you posted. We're kind of in the last 60 days where this is a really critical time that we want to keep kind of calling out to the hospital. The easiest solution to all of this is for UMass to change the decision and commit to keeping the birthing center open, right? They can do that. They do not have to close the birthing center in 120 days after the announcement. they're allowed to under state law, but they don't have to. And I think that that's the other piece that we're hoping to change, kind of bigger picture. The 120-day closure for a birthing center doesn't work. It doesn't take 4 months to grow a baby, right? Like, so for these pregnant families to get that news just before Memorial Day weekend, hey, you're due in October, you got to go find another place to give birth. Like, that's really jarring.
Yeah, that's, I cannot imagine being halfway through your pregnancy and being told, like, everything that you were planning on now has to be upended. Like, you should be worrying about what, you know, what kind of crib you're getting or what the nursery is going to look like, not where you're going to give birth. Before we pivot, I do want to give a quick shout out to the nurses as well, who, you know, I know a lot of Clinton nurses have been standing shoulder to shoulder to our Leominster nurses, and Mass Nurses Association has been fantastic on organizing and making sure that, you know, our efforts can be easily plugged into that of the communities, and so many community leaders in Leominster as well.
And unfortunately, the Mass Nurses Association has seen this playbook happen kind of all over the state. And so a lot of us were frustrated that the announcement came just before a holiday weekend, that this is playing out over a summer where it's really hard for us to kind of wrangle people and keep people connected to know what the timeline is, and that there's a very structured timeline that's playing out towards this closure. But we know that this is not unique to Leominster, and that this is usually the tactic that's used to kind of catch us off guard at an inconvenient time for a lot of us when we have vacations planned and kids are on vacation and all of everyone's schedule. But the Leominster nurses are incredible and have been committed to providing this patient care like through September, and our community is ready, and we are ready, and obstetricians in the community are ready to continue to sustain that birthing center. None of us want it to close, and we really want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to call upon UMass Memorial to change their mind and come to the table with a real plan for how do we sustain this birthing center. So, Rep. Kilcoyne, I mean, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. One of the things that, and I think it's really relevant to this conversation about kind of how do we sustain our community hospitals, one of the things we ask on representing Leominster is, like, how can folks be better advocates about things that they care about? Do you have any advice in your career about how folks can advocate for things they care about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the biggest thing is just to talk to us, communicate with us. You know, I think email and social media has made that a lot easier for a lot of people, but I still see so many folks that are just like, oh, I didn't think I could call you on that about this bill or this thing I care about. And I'm like, no, that's why we're here.
It's my job.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, for those that, you know, if you have a question, email, call our office, just any way that you come up to me if you see me out and about. You know, I always see people, you know, at community events and things like that, and just always don't hesitate to reach out to our offices and tell us what bills you care about, if there's a certain bill, or what issues you're caring about, or if you're having a problem and you don't know what the solution is, especially if it's a state-related issue. You know, we can sometimes help. And even if you are caring about there's something you care about, you don't know if there's a bill filed, you don't know if there's a bill number, reach out to us. Sometimes we can find legislation that is kind of exactly what you are looking to do. That is exactly the policy that you're articulating.
There's more than 6,000 bills we're considering right now. Trust me, like, there's something on almost every topic.
And if you are if there's out of the 6,000 bills, there's nothing there, you know, we can talk about writing legislation. You know, we've worked with constituents to get legislation filed. We've even filed legislation on behalf of constituents. So I think that's the biggest thing is just don't be intimidated, don't be afraid. Just call us, email us, and you know, take it from there.
I often describe us as the switchboard operators of government, right? Like, we often know who the right contacts are. So even if it's not our office and it's not our level of government, we're always happy to connect you with a more local level, or say that actually that's a federal issue and let's connect you with your member of Congress.
Right, and my district has 2 Congress members representing us, so we're lucky to have two people advocating for us down on DC. So Jim McGovern and Lori Trahan are both great to work with, and that exact thing has happened where someone had a federal issue that really wasn't in our wheelhouse, but we were able to connect them with their respective congressional offices, and they were able to help them out.
Yeah, we're lucky in Leominster that my office is kind of equidistant between the mayor's office and the congressman's office.
All three right there.
Like, no matter what, I can get folks connected to the right place.
Yeah.
So Rep. Cookcoin, thank you so much for taking the time this summer to come out. I hope you have safe travels as we head on the highway.
Yes, you as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was great. It's always fun to come down to Leominster. You know, it's a very quick drive, so it's a really perfect way to get ready to go take a big vote on our state budget and get that wrapped up. And I'm happy to start. It's been great to start my day here talking about regional issues and getting to have a nice little morning chat.
Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.